And so it's module 3, lecture 3, and tonight we're going to look at the life and the travels of Paul, the epistles, the letters to the Romans, and epistles to the Corinthians. So far what we've looked at is the intertestamental background. God was preparing the world for the birth of Jesus. We looked at the synoptic gospels, remember Matthew, Mark and Luke, and we said synoptic means almost like a snapshot. The three of them are grouped together because they were written more or less about the same time. They also tell more of the story of Jesus, okay, and from a similar perspective. We say that Mark is actually probably the first gospel to be written, and then Matthew and Luke were probably written about the same time. And then we looked at the Gospel of John, which is also the Gospel of love, and we said that it was a deeper gospel. In other words, it was now developing an ideology, a theology, a way of thinking about what it means to follow Jesus. Okay, so that's what we've done. And then we looked at the book of Acts, the story of the early church and the spreading of the gospel. So what we're going to do in this lecture, we're going to look at the life and ministry of the Apostle Paul, letter writing in the first century, and epistles of Paul. In other words, epistles is letters. Okay, it's basically a Latin word for letters of Paul to the churches in Rome and in Corinth. So before we go into that, we need to really look at the Apostle Paul, because Paul wrote majority of the letters, okay, if not most of the letters. So we need to get to know Paul a little bit more than what we've heard or what we think about Paul. I know a lot of people don't like Paul because of the things that he says, especially things that he says about women, and there's a love-hate relationship with Paul. But we need to understand Paul a little bit, and what made Paul be Paul, that he wrote basically more than half of the New Testament. Okay, so he's an apostle to the Gentiles. So as much as he was a Jew, he basically, his audience were Gentiles. Okay, Paul was born in Tarsus, not in Jerusalem or Judea. A lot of people have this misconception that Paul was actually born in Israel. He wasn't. Okay, he was born in Tarsus, and Tarsus is a city which is basically in what we know modern day Turkey. Okay, so he was born in Tarsus. He was born to a Jewish family, and he was born and raised a Jew, giving him great insight into and appreciation for the Jewish culture. Okay, he trained as a Jewish rabbi and a Pharisee, which gave him good knowledge of the law and Judaism. He learned to speak Greek and was exposed to Greek philosophy or thinking during his upbringing. He became a Roman citizen by birth, providing him with much needed protection and freedom. And he was dramatically saved by God and became a Christian by conversion and conviction. So you can see just from this slide that we're told he's a Jew, we're told he's a Pharisee, we're told he spoke Greek, and we're told he's a Roman citizen. Okay? So just having those four things make Paul much easier to be able to spread the gospel. Being a Jew, obviously the Jewish culture, but not just a Jew, but a Pharisee, he understood the laws, he understood the whole thing about the sacrificial system, about the lamb, about salvation, about redemption, the plan of God. He understood that as a Pharisee. He spoke Greek, okay? Because why did he speak Greek? Because Alexander the Great made sure that everyone would read, speak, and understand Greek. And Paul was a part of that everyone. And he was a Roman citizen because he was born in Tarsus, which was almost like a state of the Roman Empire. So that made him a Roman citizen, which allowed him to travel easier because he didn't need a visa, okay? And also it allowed him to, when he was arrested, he had a proper trial, where if you were not a Roman citizen, they wouldn't give you the time of day. Okay, so can you see already how Paul is sort of puts him above the rest with regards to what his call was. Okay, let's look a little bit more at that. Paul the Jew, he was Jewish to the bone. Okay, so he was a real Jew. Okay, he knew Hebrew and Aramaic. Hebrew was the spoken, the written language. Aramaic was the spoken language in the time of the Old Testament. He was committed to the Jews. He understood the law and its implication. As a Greek, he had a good command of the Greek language, and he knew something of the Greek philosophy. Okay, and that was very interesting because later on he actually uses it when he speaks to the Romans about the unknown God. Remember? When he was talking about the unknown God. Now, if he didn't know Greek philosophy, okay, and mythology, and Roman philosophy and mythology, which was very similar, because the Romans borrowed a lot from the Greek when it came to mythology, then he wouldn't be able to speak about this God and how to speak about this unknown God. But because he was a philosopher, okay, it allowed him to be able to communicate easier. As a Roman, he was born a Roman citizen in Tarsus. Paul's parents probably lived in Cilicia, which is basically a region. His citizenship provided him some rights and protection. It gave him privileges he needed to use, such as the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, right to a fair trial, and appeal to Caesar. And you'll see that later on, some of the letters that Paul wrote, he actually wrote them in prison. Now, if you were not a citizen, you wouldn't get the right and the privilege to write letters in prison. It wasn't allowed. Okay, you were basically in prison to die and await to die. So if you either died in prison or you were waiting to die, you were not given a trial. With Paul, he was given a trial, and by the fact that he was given a trial, he was allowed to basically have representation. He was allowed to have lawyers, and he was allowed to present it before Caesar, which was the highest court of all. Okay, and during that time, he was allowed to communicate through letters, and you will see later on this evening how he used that. Paul's conversion to Christ is described in Acts chapter 9 as a dramatic and personal encounter with Christ, an incident he related 3 times in the book of Acts, showing what impact it made on his life. You all know about what happened with Paul? Hey? He got knocked off the horse. Paul was actually persecuting the Jews, the believers, those Jews who were believing in Jesus. He was actually catching them out and killing them. Okay? And one day he was traveling, and the Lord knocked him off his horse, made him blind for 3 days. And then after 3 days, he was able to see again, and he was now believing in Jesus. And he also, over that time, heard the Lord say to him, "Why are you persecuting me? Why are you killing people in who believe in me?" So from someone who was killing them, now he was someone who was spreading and making sure that more people were believers in Christ. He received a unique revelation from Christ, the content of which is not known to us. His radical transformation became his own exodus experience, changing him from persecutor to proclaimer of the Christian faith. He was able to come to grips with the radical demands of Christianity. As a result, he was used by God as missionary to the Gentile and radically applied the true implication of the gospel. All right, Paul the Apostle. Now, the term apostle comes from the Latin apostelos or apostello, means to send. Okay, initially referred to those sent out by Christ, but later became a more technical term to refer to the first disciples. Okay, someone this morning asked me, what's the difference between a disciple and an apostle? Okay, the disciples were students. A disciple is a word for student. Okay, In those days, you had schools, different schools. Not like a school like we have. We have Hunklip, we've got Balmoral, we've got all these 72 schools around and in Queenstown, okay? The schools in those days was very much a group like you guys are, okay? So if we were in the Old Testament, New Testament time, then I will be called the rabbi, the teacher, and you will be called my disciples, or in Hebrew it's called Talmidim, okay? And disciple means basically followers or students, okay? What happened is when Jesus dies, remember he gives them the Great Commission and he says, go into the world and make disciples, okay, make students, okay? But start in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So he's sending them out. Now, as soon as a disciple gets sent out, he's what is known in those days as an apostle. Okay? So in a narrow sense, it refers to the 12 apostles, but was later extended to include some early leaders commissioned by the Lord to lay the foundation of the church. We find some qualification in Acts chapter 1, 21 to 22 for a person to be appointed as an apostle. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the role and position of apostles have ceased to exist, and the first century after the first century, and can only be applied in a general sense to those who have an apostolic type ministry. What I was explaining into this morning lecture is, if, for example, Gabriela, for example, feels that she has to go back to Cuba and tell people about Jesus, okay? And this church recognizes the call on her life. And we say, you know what, we're going to support you financially, and we're going to support you spiritually, and we are sending you out. Then this church will be known of having an apostolic ministry, okay? And that is where that word is still used, okay? So as much as she might be a missionary to Cuba, this church is got an apostolic ministry in that we're sending you, we're identified and we're sending you to be an apostle or to be an evangelist or missionary in Cuba for us. It's almost as if she's taking this church and putting it in Cuba and using it, okay? So that's basically how that term is being used. Saul becomes Paul. Most people wrongly assume that Paul's name was changed with his conversion. Okay? Paul's name was not changed. Okay? Paul's name, the name Paul is the Greek name, his Greek name. Okay? And I was using an example. This morning there was a lady who was sitting here, and I said to her, what's your name? And she said, Constant. And I said to her, okay, what's your Xhosa name? Okay, and I can't pronounce it. Okay? And I said to her, why did when I asked you what's your name, you said Constant? And she goes, because that's my English name. And I said, why have you got an English name? You're not English, you're Xhosa. And she said, because my parents in those days, in the days of apartheid and before, and much, much earlier, especially black people had to have an English name. And that English name was often given to them when they were baptized. Okay? Or the naming of the child was given to them when they were baptized. Okay? So the same thing with Paul. Paul's name is Saul. Okay? But he was now ministering to Greeks and Romans. Okay? If he came in as Saul, they wouldn't give him the time of day. Okay? So the name Paul, and your mom was saying it's actually Paulos. Okay? The Greek name. And in Greece, when you go there, you actually talk about Paulos. Okay? And that was the way they recognized him in that place. Okay? I remember when I was in school, and every time we had to fill in the forms, I don't know if you still remember, and he used to ask you for surname and Christian name. And I wasn't a believer in Christ, so I used to rub out Christian name and write on top Hebrew. Because Lichai is definitely not a Christian name, you know. And that is sort of like what was happening. So Paul is his Greek name, and Saul is his Jewish name. Like this lady Constant is an English name, but she has a Xhosa name. Okay. His conversion is described in Acts chapter 9, where he is referred to by his Hebrew name, Saul, a practice that continued for several chapters. The switch of names happened in Acts chapter 13 when Paul now spoke to the Roman proconsul by the same name, Paul. And this name stuck for the rest of Acts and epistles. So it's almost as if I can imagine this guy saying to him, "What's your name?" And he says, "Saul." Huh? How do you say it? Saul. Now you know what? I'm Paul. I'm going to call you Paul. It's easier. Almost like a nickname kind of thing, you know. And in school, if you tell people who went to school with me, Lichai, they won't remember me. But if you tell them Lichi, they'll know exactly who you're talking about. I was known as Lichi in school. And the reason was because I'm rough on the outside and sweet on the inside. You see, so that is a nickname. And in a way, that was Paul's nickname. Okay, I'm not going to call you Saul. From now on, you Paul. Why? Because I said so. Okay. Paul was his Greek name, Paulos, and probably suited him better in a Greek environment. Many Jews born in other parts of the world had both a Hebrew and a Greek name. Here's a picture of a road again. Remember I said to you the roads that the Romans built, and you can see a whole lot of ruins and a road going. But if you look above that over here, there's modern day houses. Can you see? There's modern day houses, and there's, you know, in the backyard there's a Roman road going right next to your yard. How's that? Cool. His birth date is unknown, but it could have been around 5 AD or slightly later. He was born in Tarsus, an important city in the Roman province of Sicilia, modern Turkey. It was a well-known city boasting a Greek university and Stoic thinking philosophy. Okay, and that's why he was a philosopher and a great thinker, because he was born in that city. Okay, imagine someone getting born in Stellenbosch or Grahamstown. Okay, you can't help but be surrounded by academia. Okay, wherever you go, there's a university and people in the university and so on. It doesn't make you necessarily a philosopher, but you know what I'm getting. He was influenced by what was happening around it.
You must remember, you also get a lot of academia nuts.
Yes, academia nuts, yeah. He was named Saul after the first king of Israel, but probably simultaneously received the Greek name Paul to help him get around in his non-Jewish environment. There's a city of Tarsus, and again you see a modern day building over there, factory over there, but here's a bridge. Okay? And you go around Greece, you go around Italy, it's all over the place. You go around Israel, it's all over the place. Not far, about maybe 2 kilometers from where I lived in Israel, was the one of the 7 wells that Isaac dug up. Okay, and the city is called Beersheba, which means the 7th well. Okay, and it was literally 2 kilometers from my house. It was there. Now there's a very nice restaurant right next to it. All right, what we're going to do is from this time onwards, every time we look at cities, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the city, because the cities and who lived in the cities played quite an important role to what Paul and how Paul and the other apostles were going to minister in that city. Okay, and you will see as we talk about the cities how important it is to know a little bit about that city. So the city of Tarsus, during the time of Pompey, 67 BC. By the way, I'm going to apologize. If you don't like history, yeah, because there's a lot of history. Okay, so I'm going to make it as interesting as possible to you. If you love history, sit back and enjoy. Tarsus was made capital over the Roman province of Cilicia, and Jews began to receive Roman citizenship. Mark Antony and Cleopatra, that Antony, okay, who controlled the eastern province, declared the city free in 42 BC. Tarsus continued to receive special privileges under Augustus, who exempted the city from imperial taxation because of Ethon. I am going to not be able to pronounce a lot of these names, and I felt so stupid with your mom sitting here because she was just going, Atheros. And I'm going, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Now, I know that your Greek is as good as my Greek, so I'm not going to ask you to pronounce it, Dina. But, yeah, your mom had no problem in pronouncing it. Okay, so that guy, his teacher and friend was Tarsian. Tarsus grew in a culture and intellect center. The Stoic philosophers, like all these guys, lived in the city in the 1st century AD. Tarsus was situated on the banks of the river. Now that's important because when a city is situated on the banks of a river, now the rivers that we're talking about here are not like just a little river running. It's a river that literally boats were able to go in. And that's important because if a city is on it, then people are going to travel from one point to another. Okay? And Tarsus was situated in that place.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How come the Jews, you say, were then given Roman citizenship?
Some of them, those who were born there, okay, because they were born into, so basically a place like Tarsus was now a province of the Roman Empire. Okay?
So even if you were a Jew, you could be a Roman citizen?
Yes, yeah, because you were born there. So it's very much like when South Africa was accepted back into the Commonwealth, okay, all of a sudden everyone had a grandmother in England. And everyone was going mad with getting a British passport, okay. Why? Because if you got a British passport, it's a part of the European Union, okay, and you don't need a visa. Okay, I remember when about 16 years ago I was in Europe, and a friend of mine, her grandmother was British, and she had a British passport. All the rest of us had to pay quite a lot of money to travel in Europe. She just like, ta-da! You know, with this British passport, and they're like, please come in, you know, like the Queen Elizabeth kind of thing, you know. So the same thing was there, okay. They actually developed this passport system, okay, that we're talking about, okay. So because as much as he was Jewish by faith, because he was born in Tarsus, which was a province of the Roman Empire, he was a citizen. If he was born in Israel, Israel was not a province. They never made Israel a province. It wasn't their intention. The Romans actually were not interested in Israel. They were interested in Egypt. Israel was basically a campsite to go to Egypt, but they never really fully got Egypt. Mark Antony tried, but he never ended up controlling Egypt. Okay, so they were not interested in Israel. Israel was a crossroad, basically, a very, very troublesome crossroad. But they were not interested. There was nothing in Israel for them. Okay, but they wanted Egypt because Egypt was the gateway into Africa. Okay, and that's why they wanted to control Egypt. Okay, and that's why Israel never became a province of the Roman Empire. Paul's education. Paul moved or was sent to Jerusalem to be educated in the Jewish law. This could have been in line with Jewish customs, or because Paul sensed a calling to become a rabbi. He studied under Gamaliel the first and trained to become a rabbi. He had an excellent knowledge of the Old Testament, which he probably studied in Hebrew, but he most often quoted from the Septuagint. Remember, the Septuagint is the Latin translation of the Old Testament. Okay, I'm just going to turn the urn off. Okay, so not only could he read Hebrew, but he could also Latin, okay, and Greek as well, and the Septuagint was that translation, the first translation. There is no certainty as to whether he saw and knew Jesus in his human form. It is very likely that he did, but there is very little indication that he did. So you can look at 2 Corinthians 5:16 as possible reference of knowing Jesus. Okay. Now if you look at that, this is what is known as the Galileo inscription. Okay. And it was dug years ago. And why it's important, because it actually gives a reference to Galileo, which then we are able to more or less date, because Paul was a student of Galileo, so we can more or less date where Paul was. And there are two approaches to chronologically date something within history. There is a relative chronology, different dates in Paul's life, so we're talking about Paul, and the actual chronology, a fixed date on a calendar. So we are able to draw up a relative chronology from the book of Acts, okay, Galatians, and a few other references in Paul's letters, epistles, but we can link this with a possible fixed date from the first century provided by the Galileo inscription, what I just showed you, the picture. And it was discovered in 1905, in which Caesar Claudius referred to Galileo, governor of Achaia. Okay, so Galileo was a proconsular probably from 1st June 51 to 1st June 52, and Acts 18:12 provides a possible link describing Paul's encounter with Galileo in Corinth. Okay, now how can we say the exact dates? Because those dates are actually mentioned in that thing. Okay, remember I said to you about the Romans? They were very pedantic about keeping records, which of course for us is great because we can look back and say, here it is, with certainty. Okay, there's, if you know a little bit of your maps, there's your Athens at the top there, and there's Corinth, book of Corinthians, talks about the church here, and Achaia basically was a province at that time. So that's what we're talking about at the moment. Achaia refers to an area before the Roman conquest in 146 BC of a strip of land between the Gulf of Corinth in the north and Ilias and Achaia, careful, in the south, embracing 12 cities leagued together. So it was basically like a province of 12 cities put together and made into like I guess like Lukanji. Lukanji is not just Queenstown, okay, it's also Whittlesea, it's also, what else? Help me here. Okay, so there's quite a lot. Okay, so it's not Lukanji is just Queenstown, and the same would have been with that. It would have been a collection of cities that will be placed under one type of department or ruling governmental type of The Achaean League was prominent in the struggle of the Greeks against the Roman domination. It is probably due to this fact that the name was afterward extended to the whole country south of Macedonia, corresponding approximately to modern Greece. During the Roman period, Achaia was usually governed as a senatorial province. Okay, and that's very important because if the Senate was there, it's basically like what we're talking about Pretoria. And what's important about Pretoria is because not only it's a capital, but that is where the government is. Okay, that's where decisions are being made. Okay, so it is important. So that was important because if Paul went there, he can speak the language, understand the language, he understands the way they're thinking, because he's a philosopher. Okay, if he could speak to these guys who have got a huge influence on the people around them, can you imagine the difference that he can make? Okay, so Paul was quite a clever dude, hey? Paul in the book of Acts, his birth and upbringing are not mentioned in the New Testament, but we have the following information in Acts. Persecutor of the Christians, conversion to Christ, initial ministry, ministry at Antioch, and missionary journeys. Also the name change, arrest and journey to Rome. And then the book of Acts concludes with Paul in prison in Rome in chapter 28. Tradition has it that he was released, traveled some more before ending up back in Rome, where he was then eventually executed. Paul's attention was always to go to Rome, but the only time he got there was in prison. But actually, he wanted to go further than Rome, and you will see, he actually wanted to go to Spain. Okay, and he writes to one of the churches to ask them if they can help him with sorting out a journey to Spain, but he never made it. Okay, he was arrested and never basically made it. Alright, that's basically just an outline of dates, certain dates for you to have a look at. Right, so we're going to look now at the letters and the epistles. And as I said, epistles are basically the letters. Writing in the first century. Remember I asked you last time, who remembers still writing letters? Okay, and in school we actually had to learn how to write the letter. It's not simply just writing, but you had to put in the address, the date, leave a line, introduction, to whom it may concern, or dear so-and-so, and the body, and what's in the body, and then after the body, with regards, yours truly, when to use those, remember? And then if you sort of forgot something, PS, PSS, and all that kind of stuff. All right. Now the only remnants of PS is a chocolate. Writing included personal letters, contracts, religious documents, etc. There are plenty of examples from archaeological excavations, and we are able to, because quite a lot of things, letters were left, were found. Letter writing took on a particular style and format. You had the name or the identification of the writer from whoever it was, identification of a receiver to whoever it is, a greeting and well wishes to the reader, stating the purpose of the writing, then the body of the letter, and then greetings to and from others. Okay, and if you know your Paul letters, it's very, very typical. If you read it, you will see it. Paul followed a very typical Greek style, and you can see how influenced he was by the Greeks. Okay, I mean, hugely influenced. Okay, so author or heading, introducing himself, and often when you read a lot of his letters, he does. Remember in the one, he actually goes further than that and he says not only is he Paul of Tarsus, but he's from the tribe of Benjamin, a Pharisees of Pharisees, and he actually gives almost his curriculum vitae before he even writes the letter. Okay, but that was the way in which they used to do those in those days. The recipient, name of church or a person, greeting to the recipients, the body, main information or argument, in conclusion, normally some greetings from others. Paul used a conventional style but gave it a Christian content. Okay, example, charin is greetings, became charis or charis, which is grace. And if you know any of the Paul, may the grace of the Lord be with you. Okay, and that wasn't him trying to be pompous. Okay, but he's basically greeting them. He's basically saying to them, you know, greetings. But the greetings then later on became more than a greeting, but it was the grace, especially because he wrote not just to anyone. Like for example, I have in a lot of letters that I type, and obviously a lot of my correspondence has to do with within the Christian circles. You will see that I sign in his name, and then I sign my name. Okay, because I'm doing it in Jesus' name. But today, for example, I had to send a letter of proof of residence and proof of employment and so on, and I don't think the guy would if I put in his name, like his name are you talking about? I just want proof of resident, So I said, yours truly, Lichai Berkovich, So it's a similar thing in here, that obviously he's using from greetings into grace, because he's talking to people in a church, and they will know about grace. Letters in the New Testament, we have a total of 21 letters in the New Testament. In most cases, they function like a one-sided conversation. We are not privileged to the other side of the conversation, but often we can get a good idea of what kind of issues was being addressed. Okay, because Paul writes the letter. Okay, and we've got archaeological evidence of him writing the letters, but we don't have the respond. If there was a respond, as in, okay, I'm going to do it. Okay, so we don't have the 2 blue ticks on the WhatsApp. We're still waiting to see if they read it and if they're going to typing on the side. Okay, it's amazing how those blue ticks have started ruling our lives. Eh? Why have they not read it yet? Don't they look on the phone? I see some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hey? The order of the epistle in the New Testament was probably based on the length and the grouping of the letters by author. The chronology and importance of the letters played no role. So the way they were put together in the Bible, it's not because the first letter is more important than the last letter. It actually had to do with how long the letters were and how many of those letters. Okay, so when you get, for example, 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians, there were a lot of letters that you literally had to group them together into one book and then another book. Okay. And that's why often you get the shorter letters at the end, like Jude, like 1 page. James is what, 5 chapters, 4 chapters. Okay, so it's not because that is more important than that, but it's length and how many of them were written. That basically, when the church fathers decided to put them together, and the canon of the New Testament, that was the way in which they did it. Right, Paul's epistles, 13, or what is known as the Pauline corpse. Okay, not a dead body, but a collection of letters. Okay, 9 of them were written to churches. So Romans, the church for the Romans in Rome, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, the church in Corinth, Galatians, the church in Galatia, the church in Ephesus, the church in Philippi, the church in Colossians, the church in Thessalonica, and again here's 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. It was a collection of letters. 4 of them were to individuals, like Philemon, 1st and 2nd Timothy, and Titus. Some were prison letters written from prison. Some were pastoral epistles written to pastors. For example, 1st and 2nd Timothy are pastoral letters. Okay, they were written. Timothy was a pastor. He was a young pastor. He was a student of Paul, and Paul basically left him in charge of the church. And then when 1st and 2nd Timothy are basically letters to Paul. 2 Timothy chapter 4, Timothy was having a problem because he was a young guy and the people were not listening to him. So, what do you know? You're a young guy. And if you read there, Paul is reminding him and he says, if the elders lay their hands on you and say that you are ordained now, then they need to listen to you because they ordained you. Okay? And I know especially in the black culture, it's very important because I know often our young ministers who serve in some of our black churches have a problem if they're young, because the old guys don't want to listen. And especially if he's young and he's not married, then he doesn't know anything. Am I right? Yeah, I'm right. I know. Some of my best friends, only after they got married and became around 40, Okay, all of a sudden the ministry was much more powerful because now the old guys, the main association, now took him seriously. Okay, I remember your minister before he got married and before he got into his 40s. You know, he was a youngster like me. But and Timothy had that problem, and Paul writes a letter to Timothy, and he says, do not let them look down at you because of your age, but if they laid hands on you, then you're ordained. They don't need to. And he then writes a letter to them and saying, you need to look after your pastor, okay, because you've laid hands on him. Okay. General epistles 8. General, since they are not written to any identified church or individuals, like Hebrews, 1st and 2nd Peter's, 1st, 2nd and 3rd John, James, and Jude. Okay. Geographical spread of Paul's letters, and you can see in the map behind me, these are basically the cities that we are talking about when we're talking about these churches. These are the churches are located in this area. So can you see it's very much the Mediterranean, the sort of like southern part of Europe, with there's Italy, there's Greece, there's Turkey over here. So it's very much in this area. This is what we're looking at. Romans, impact of the letter to the Romans. So we're looking now at the Romans letter. The letter to the Roman has made a lasting impact on the church in the past 2,000 years. It literally changed the course of history, both Christians and secular, during and after the Reformation in the 16th century. Remember the Reformation? We spoke a little bit about them when I told you how the different denominations came to be. Okay, Augustine, Luther, Martin Luther, Wesleyan, and many others. It has been the source of many studies and commentaries through the ages. Martin Lloyd-Jones preached and published a series on Romans encompassing 14 volumes of 350 plus sermons. That's a lot of sermons. Has anyone been there? No. None of you guys been there? Okay. We had in the morning we had one person who'd been there. And I said to her, so is it as beautiful as it is? And she said, I didn't like the tour at all. I hate old buildings. I said, well, you definitely went to the wrong country. Unless you went for the ice cream and the spaghetti, you went to the wrong country. Okay. But there's a famous building there. Right, the city of Rome had achieved a grandeur befitting the capital of the empire dominating the whole of the Mediterranean. It was at the time the largest city in the world and probably the largest city ever built until the 19th century. Estimates of its peak population ranging from 450,000 to over 3.5 million people, with estimates of 1 to 2 million being most popular with historians. And I know what you're thinking. Is that it? Is that all? Okay, I mean, wasn't it estimated not long ago that our population has gone up in this country? We are nearing the 61 million people in South Africa. Okay, so I mean 3.5 million, that's nothing. In these days, it was a lot. Because we're talking about all these people in one city. Okay, so that's a lot of people. Okay, this gradual increase under Augustus, who completed Caesar's project and added many of his own, such as the Forum of Augustus and the Era Passi. He is said to have remarked that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. The great fire of Rome during the reign of Nero left much of the city destroyed, but in many ways it was used as an excuse for new development. So there's a thing for you. You want more construction business? Set the city alight.
I mean, so I was my ship one day.
Right, the church in Rome. The church in Rome was planted by an unknown person or persons. It must have been in existence for a while by the time Paul wrote this letter. Paul didn't plant the church in Rome. It was already there. Neither Paul, Peter, nor any of the other apostles had anything to do with planting of this church. It could have been planted by a convert from the day of Pentecost. Because remember what happened in the day of Pentecost? There were people from all over. And it could be that maybe someone from Rome was there doing business in Israel. Maybe if, Rome being a commercialized city, maybe he had some stuff that, he wanted to sell in Jerusalem. And it just so happened on the day of Pentecost, he was able to hear the gospel preached to him in Latin or in Greek. And then he went to Rome and said, guys, listen to this. You know what happened? It could have been that. We don't know. But the church was in existence already. And Paul actually never visited that church. He heard about the church, but he never visited that church. The impression is that the church in Rome consisted mainly of Gentile Christians, but may have started with a Jewish base. Many Jews lived in the city at one time. Okay, and remember we spoke about what are Jews doing in Rome? Well, remember how they spread out all over the place? Okay, there must have also been mixed marriages, and a guy marries a Jewish woman and he takes her with, or vice versa, and they go with. Okay, so it was all in existence. Paul's relationship with Rome, from the letter itself, we concluded Paul did not know the congregation personally. He certainly did not plant that church. He indicated that he always had a desire to visit Rome, but this dream was not fulfilled during his years of freedom. Paul wrote to the Roman church to prepare the way for his planned to visiting to them, as well as to ask them for assistance in his desire to preach the gospel in Spain. So an example, I remember about a month or so ago, we had Omri, who came here, another Israeli convert who came here and taught us a little bit about the importance of Jewish evangelism. Now, I got from his PA, from Della, I got an email because of a person that they knew in Durban, that knew me, and knew that I was living here now and ministering here. And he said to him, here's his email. I don't have his number, but here's his email. Okay? Della emails me and she said, listen, this is who we are. This is who Omri is. I believe you are from an Israeli background itself and you have a church. We are going to be on our way to Cradock. Okay? And from Cradock we're going to Port Elizabeth. Okay? And we believe you're sort of in that area. Can we come and spend one night here and just advertise and see who wants to come? Okay? And she literally gave me a weekend to advertise. And thanks to the power of Facebook, okay, and few people in Facebook who love sharing, okay, and they shared, we had a good turnout of people from different congregations, okay, who wanted to hear about it. It's the same thing Paul is basically saying, I'm coming through to Rome. This is my intention. And there's a strong belief that he was actually in Ephesus, okay, at that time that he wrote the book of Romans, the letters to the Romans. And he says, this is where I am at the moment, and I want to go to Spain, but I've always wanted to minister in Rome. And I know that you've got a church there. Do you mind if I come and stay with you for a little bit? And then after that, maybe you guys know some people in Spain and you can speak to them and so on. That is basically what happened. Okay, and that's how he came across the church in Rome. Okay, this is an excavation that was found about the tea and the coffee, and basically it's tea time. Any questions, guys?